He almost missed it. A faint line slid through the background noise, just a smudge on the screen. It was August 2009, and most days at Fleet Intelligence Command were spent on drills and monitoring shipping traffic. However, this ping made the analyst pause. It had rhythm, precision. It was neither commercial nor friendly. He sifted through the noise, cutting clutter and interference until another signal emerged, clearer and closer just off the continental shelf near Virginia. Checking the frequency against operation logs revealed no NATO drills or scheduled exercises. Concerned, he flagged it immediately, and a supervisor stepped in to take a closer look. Then a second trace appeared further south, bearing the same unmistakable signature. The supervisor reached for the phone with quiet urgency. As the feed refreshed, one word surfaced in his mind: Akula. By the 1980s, the Cold War was nearing its end. On land and in the skies, detente flickered, but beneath the waves, the hunt had never been hotter. Flushed with Reagan-era funding and technical superiority, the U.S. Navy had transformed the undersea battlefield into a silent, high-stakes arena. Los Angeles-class submarines, and soon the Seawolf, stalked the depths. For the Soviet Union, the gap was growing untenable. Their older boats, Victor IIs, Echo IIs, even the once feared Alphas, now broadcast their presence with every shaft rotation. NATO sonar nets heard everything Moscow could throw their way, leaving Soviet boats exposed. That changed in 1986, when something new slipped from the Northern Fleet's icy shadow. Project 971, codenamed Akula by NATO, shook up the balance. Unlike previous Soviet designs, brute force engineering with a reactor welded to a frame, this was a masterpiece of stealth, a hunter cloaked in silence. The large Akula displaced nearly 13,000 tons submerged and featured a classic Soviet double hull that allowed for extra ballast and improved survivability. At 111 meters long, it had an elegant hydrodynamic sail and a teardrop-shaped pod atop the tail fin for a towed passive sonar array. Inside, an OK-650 pressurized water reactor, shared with the Typhoon and Oscar II classes, cranked out about 190 megawatts, powering submerged speeds of 33 knots and enabling dives to nearly 480 meters, roughly 200 meters deeper than Los Angeles-class boats. But it was the noise discipline that set Akula apart. Its propulsion was raft-mounted to damp vibration. Both inner and outer hulls were coated with anechoic tiles. Even limber hulls had retractable covers to reduce acoustic returns. As a result, Akula's acoustic signature nearly matched the U.S. Navy's best, closing a gap once thought unreachable. When the first Akulas began patrols in 1986, American sonar operators heard something horrifying. Soviet submarines had lost their distinctive sound. The rumble was gone. Now only a trace, a faint intermittent blip, might reveal their presence, often too late. In Pentagon briefings and NATO war rooms, one term echoed with grim finality: acoustic parity. For the first time in decades, U.S. carrier strike groups had to assume they were being watched, stalked, and hunted. John Anthony Walker sat at his desk in Norfolk amid the hum of machines and flickering fluorescent lights. To most, he looked like a balding, middle-aged naval communications specialist with a clearance badge and a quiet demeanor. Beneath that unassuming exterior, however, burned desperation, greed, and simmering resentment. As he dug through shredded folders, cryptographic keys, and raw data from the Navy's most secret underwater units, he found the real key to American naval power: silence. It wasn't the carriers or battleships that mattered most. It was the submarines built to move unseen and unheard. Their sonar signals simply vanished before anyone could track them. He copied everything: key lists, protocols, and detailed specifications, revealing how U.S. submarines stayed hidden beneath the waves. Walker found blueprints for raft-mounted turbines, reactor vibration isolation diagrams, and memos emphasizing the importance of acoustic discipline. Minimizing cavitation, the noisy air bubbles trailing propellers, was crucial. Even the designs of screws were sculpted to reduce this telltale noise, keeping American subs invisible long before detection. He delivered the secrets the old-fashioned way by dead drop. Beginning in 1968, Walker passed packages of classified documents, often stored in trash bags or plastic containers, at prearranged drop sites like secluded parks, bridges, or forest trails across the East Coast. His primary KGB handler, codenamed Sergei, would retrieve them and leave cash in return. Over time, Walker recruited his son, brother, and friend Jerry Whitworth into the operation, turning it into one of the most damaging spy rings in U.S. naval history. By passing this treasure trove of secrets to Moscow, Walker fueled the Soviet Navy's leap forward in undersea warfare. In Soviet strategy rooms, generals and engineers pored over his documents like sacred texts. They'd come to terms with a harsh reality. Their Victor IIs and Alphas were like loud claps in an ocean full of whispers. This failure sparked the creation of Project 971, where Walker's material provided cryptographic keys and communications protocols. Jerry Whitworth, a U.S. Navy communications specialist and former cryptologic technician, delivered something even more corrosive: the architecture of American silence. He had access to the technical marrow of U.S. submarine stealth, how sound was trapped before it could escape, how turbines were floated on vibration-isolating rafts, how crews were trained in acoustic discipline down to the closing of hatches. Most critically, he handed over classified details on anechoic tile arrays, specially designed rubberized panels that absorb sonar pulses. For Soviet engineers, Whitworth's leaks were the missing pieces to the puzzle Walker had started. They no longer had to reverse engineer silence from sonar logs. They had it page by page. As a result, vibrations from the OK-650 reactor and turbines were isolated on vibration-absorbing rafts and shock mounts tuned to near-American precision. The final piece of the stealth puzzle was the propeller. It had 7 blades carved from a solid block of high-grade steel, shaped with extreme care to cut down on noise. Every edge was fine-tuned to avoid cavitation, the tiny air bubbles that can give a submarine away. Thanks to smart design and a little help from stolen American acoustic data, the Akula's propeller moved through water almost silently. Another key edge the Akula possessed was its double-hull design. While most Western submarines used a single pressure hull, the Akula surrounded its inner hull with an outer shell, leaving a gap between them that acted like a silencer. That space soaked up vibrations and muffled engine noise before it could reach the water, making the submarine much harder to hear and giving it a major stealth advantage. A double hull also enhanced survivability. If the outer shell was damaged, the inner hull could still maintain pressure, protecting the crew. Covering that outer hull was a second layer of defense, thousands of anechoic tiles, effectively cloaking the Akula. Where earlier Soviet submarines roared, the Akula barely even whispered, becoming nearly untrackable. The Akula reached American ears in the early 1980s. When U.S. sonar operators began picking up faint acoustic signatures they couldn't identify. These weren't the usual clattering Soviet boats the Navy had learned to stalk and catalog. These were different, quieter, smoother, slipping through the Gyuk Gap, the narrow corridor between Greenland, Iceland, and the United Kingdom, leaving it barely a ripple. The first real clue came from the seabed. SOSUS, the U.S. Navy's undersea listening network, started registering long-duration contacts that defied pattern recognition. Analysts at the Naval Ocean Processing Facilities noticed anomalies, faint low-frequency traces that seemed to tail U.S. submarines or loiter in critical transit lanes. Something new was prowling the Atlantic, and it wasn't loud enough to be familiar. The tipping point came in 1985 with the launch of K-284, the first Akula. Satellite imagery and intercepted communications confirmed the Soviets had launched a new class of submarine from Severodvinsk. It was sleek, long, and fitted, with a redesigned 7-bladed propeller and raft-mounted machinery. Much of the Akula-class's dramatic leap in acoustic stealth can be traced back to a Cold War scandal that rocked the defense community in the 1980s, the Toshiba-Kongsberg affair. Between 1983 and 1984, Toshiba Machine Company, a subsidiary of the Japanese conglomerate, and Kongsberg Våpenfabrik, a Norwegian defense contractor, illegally exported precision multi-axis milling machines and sophisticated computer control systems to the Soviet Union, violating multilateral export controls. These were advanced machine tools specifically designed to shape submarine propeller blades to exact tolerances, eliminating imperfections that cause cavitation and noise. With better blades, Soviet engineers could produce propellers that helped their submarines evade traditional sonar detection thresholds. American defense officials were outraged. Congressional hearings followed, and both companies were heavily sanctioned, but the damage had been done. Pentagon officials warned that the Soviet quieting gains were very serious and could cost the U.S. Navy billions of dollars to counter. Deep under the cold North Atlantic, Where satellites couldn't see and no light reached, an Akula-class submarine moved quietly through the dark. In the glow of its control room, the crew tracked one thing: a distant sonar contact. It was a U.S. Los Angeles-class attack submarine. The contact first appeared on the MGK-540 spherical bow array, running in passive mode. It detected a faint acoustic signature barely rising above the ocean's ambient noise. A low-frequency hum peppered with subtle blade rate modulations from the Los Angeles-class's propeller and mechanical murmurs from onboard systems. The skilled sonar operators isolated these signals, filtering through ocean thermal layers and pressure shifts to pick out the sub's unique acoustic fingerprint along the Akula's hull. Flank arrays extended its hearing, capturing sound from the sides as the American sub executed a slow turn. Using these side arrays, the Akula maintained contact even as its bow sonar's view narrowed. The entire acoustic field was mapped in real time. Every bearing angle cross-referenced and fed into the MVU 1110EM fire control computer. Without firing a single active ping, the MVU 1110EM ran target motion analysis, using time-stamped bearings to calculate the Los Angeles-class boat's speed, course, and depth. The Akula adjusted its trim tanks, quietly matching depth and velocity to maintain a perfect covert trail just beyond the enemy's detection threshold. Should things turn hostile? The Akula carried MC-74 Coronet decoys such as the BHTA, programmable devices that emitted false acoustic signatures to mimic the submarine's own noise and confuse incoming torpedoes. The Akula could drop multiple decoys while executing hard maneuvers, tricking enemy subs into chasing shadows and wasting ordnance. On top of that, it had jammers, noisemakers, and other countermeasures to scramble enemy sonar and fill their displays with static and false contacts, buying time to slip away. Combined with the hull's low acoustic signature, these tools sharply reduced the chance of detection or a successful attack. For the moment, however, those mechanisms lay dormant. Western submarines focused on staying quiet and striking with precision. The Soviets still believed in hitting hard. The Akula embodied both mindsets. Built with impressive technology, it could be armed to unleash enough firepower to devastate a convoy if needed. At the bow sat its arsenal: 8 torpedo tubes, 4 533 mm and 4 650 mm. The larger tubes could fire extended-range heavyweight torpedoes or be adapted to launch standard weapons, offering unmatched loadout flexibility. In total, an Akula could carry up to 40 weapons, a mix of torpedoes, anti-ship missiles, rocket-propelled depth charges, and naval mines. The 533 mm torpedo was the go-to lightweight, a wire-guided dual-role weapon capable of hunting submarines or surface ships with reliable precision. The real hammer was the Type 65, a 650 mm heavyweight designed to threaten carrier strike group flagships, traveling over 50 knots for more than 50 kilometers. Beyond torpedoes, the Akula could launch the SSN-21 Samson, a cruise missile similar in role to the American Tomahawk, with ranges extending to roughly 3,000 kilometers, allowing the submarine to strike targets from far offshore while remaining out of sight of radar and air defenses. Later variants, such as K-157 Viper, were retrofitted to carry caliber missiles, dramatically expanding mission profiles with precision strike options against land and sea targets, including a potential nuclear delivery capability. The boat could also lay naval mines through its torpedo tubes, ideal for choke points, and was fitted with a retractable man-pads launcher for rare but vital air defense scenarios near the surface. All this firepower was coordinated through the MVU 1110EM fire control system fed by sonar inputs. Once a contact was classified, it could be targeted and engaged in seconds without guesswork. Although no confirmed combat launches of Akula-class weapons are publicly known, the sheer weight of its armament underscored the kind of hunter it was meant to be. The immediate American counter to the Akula was as technological as it was dramatic: the Seawolf-class. Born from Reagan-era ambition and turbocharged by the Soviet acoustic leap, Seawolves were larger, stealthier, faster, and capable of diving deeper than anything the U.S. had previously put to sea. Built with titanium-reinforced pressure hulls, advanced pump jet propulsion to drastically reduce cavitation, and modular sonar arrays that could sweep wider swaths of ocean with pinpoint clarity, the Seawolf was a hunter's dream. Its quieting features, from raft-mounted machinery to anechoic coatings, made it almost undetectable at cruising speeds. Armed with 8 torpedo tubes and a massive weapons payload, it could launch tomahawks, heavyweight torpedoes, and even deploy SEAL teams via dry deck shelters. At a staggering roughly $3 billion apiece, only 3 were built. They were designed to stalk Soviet boomers, shadow Akulas at depth, and survive a nuclear first strike. Budget realities and a post-Cold War shift in priorities produced a leaner but smarter successor, the Virginia-class. Though less exotic, it is a modular, multi-mission platform built at scale. Virginias feature pump-jet propulsion, composite sail structures, and open architecture electronics with photonic masts instead of traditional periscopes. They can launch drones and unmanned undersea vehicles and insert special forces. They were designed for networked warfare, collecting intelligence, launching precision strikes, or quietly watching foreign ports for weeks. Technology alone wouldn't win the silent war. The U.S. Navy overhauled its anti-submarine warfare approach, investing in SOSUS upgrades, mobile surveillance platforms, and airborne ASW assets like the P-8 Poseidon. Sonobuoys grew smarter, unmanned systems accepted more risk, and data began flowing faster through real-time battle networks. The cat-and-mouse game went global and deeper than ever. One of the Akula-class's favored hunting grounds was the Arctic, an acoustic wilderness where sound behaves unpredictably and satellites lose sight. Built for deep-water patrols, Akulas were well-suited for operations in the high north. Their reinforced hulls, advanced navigation systems, and long endurance made them ideal for slipping beneath polar ice. Later versions could dive as deep as 500-600 meters, far enough to hide beneath layers of the ocean that degrade sonar performance. These natural thermal layers made them harder for enemy sensors to track, giving Akula crews opportunities to evade detection. One of the most critical maritime choke points in this arena is the GIUK gap. During the Cold War, it served as NATO's underwater tripwire, layered with fixed sensors and patrolled by maritime aircraft. Soviet submarines, including early Akulas, routinely tried to slip through into the wider Atlantic. While exact routes remain classified, open-source tracking and naval reporting suggest Akulas continued to probe those waters well into the 21st century. K-157 Viper, a modernized Akula-2, is among the class's most active boats. Defense analysts and satellite data tracked her operating beyond the GIUK barrier and under Arctic ice as recently as 2023. This became a tactical nightmare for Western navies. Accustomed to relying on long-range sensors and surveillance networks to dominate the surface, they found the stealth submarine lurking beneath fractured, drifting ice almost impossible to track, let alone target. In the spring of 1996, the Russian Navy launched one of its most audacious post-Cold War submarine operations. The target was a U.S. Navy Ohio-class SSBN, the most vital leg of America's nuclear triad. The hunter was K-154 Tiger, a second-generation Akula-2 attack submarine with next-generation stealth capabilities. The stakes were nothing less than America's confidence in its ability to remain hidden beneath the waves. Tiger slipped into the North Atlantic sometime between April and June, navigating beneath the sonar webs of the GIUK Gap and avoiding patrol routes monitored by NATO aircraft and surface escorts. It found its quarry, an Ohio-class ballistic missile submarine, transitioning between homeport and patrol area. What followed was a feat once thought impossible. The Akula tracked the Ohio closely, using its advanced MGK 540 sonar, flank arrays, and specially quieted hull to stay out of sight. Russian officials hailed the Tiger's patrol as a clear victory. After years of budget cuts and fewer missions since the Soviet collapse, it proved their submarines could still stand toe-to-toe with the West's best. The captain of K-154, Alexei Barachev, was awarded the prestigious title Hero of the Russian Federation, a rare honor in peacetime and a sign of how seriously Moscow valued the achievement. The mission was cited in Russian defense circles as proof that acoustic parity had been reached, if not breached. For the U.S. Navy, it was a hard wake-up call. Ohio-class SSBNs, long thought to roam undetected, had been tailed for days. That sobering reality pushed the Navy to invest more in sonar countermeasures, reduce their submarines' noise signatures, and vary patrol routes to stay one step ahead. During the 1990s and 2000s, Akula-class submarines regularly tailed U.S. carrier strike groups. Sometimes they surfaced deliberately within detection range to signal presence, Other times they slipped in and out undetected, only to be discovered later in sonar logs or acoustic forensics. K-461 Volga, an early Akula-class boat, was deployed to the Mediterranean Sea alongside the Russian aircraft carrier Admiral Kuznetsov in early 1996. Led by Captain First Rank Sergei, Volga silently tracked several NATO submarines in the area. The deployment, though not widely reported at the time, stands as one of the first clear signs of Russia's post-Cold War push to reassert itself with bold undersea surveillance in disputed waters. Akula crews would go on to deliver some of the most remarkable performances of modern submarine operations. In January 1999, while commanding K-317 Panther, a commander reportedly followed a U.S. strategic missile submarine undetected for 150 hours. For this feat, he was awarded the title Hero of the Russian Federation for courage and heroism shown in the performance of military duty in conditions associated with a risk to life. While the Russian Ministry of Defense has never disclosed full details of the patrol, the award itself indicates exceptional operational success during a peacetime deployment. Open-source accounts and defense reporting suggest Panther became a reliable workhorse of Russian undersea intelligence throughout the late 1990s, executing multiple long-duration covert patrols, possibly beneath the Guyuk Gap or deep in the North Atlantic, where it gathered acoustic signatures of NATO submarines. These missions, rarely publicized, helped refine Russia's sonar libraries and proved that even a second-generation Akula could challenge NATO's surveillance reach. Though the Pentagon never publicly confirmed many of these incidents, they prompted serious reflection inside U.S. naval circles. If an Akula could get that close without being heard, what else might be slipping through the cracks? In August 2009, without warning, 2 Russian Akula-class submarines positioned themselves roughly 200 to 320 kilometers off the U.S. East Coast. Technically, they were operating in international waters, but the sudden appearance carried an unmistakable and unsettling subtext. It was the first time since the Cold War that Russian nuclear-powered attack submarines had patrolled so close to the U.S. mainland, their presence so close to the eastern seaboard, within striking distance of American naval installations and ballistic missile sub-patrol routes, was an electric jolt to the Pentagon. The story leaked within days. Major outlets ran it on the front page under headlines like, "Russian subs patrol off U.S. East Coast." Some saw it as a strategic probe, a test of U.S. detection thresholds. Others called it a deliberate throwback to Soviet-era chest-thumping. The Navy scrambled. P-3C Orions and other maritime patrol aircraft lifted off from coastal bases. SOSUS arrays were reanalyzed, ASW destroyers altered course to sweep the area, and submarines already on patrol were quietly redirected. The goal was twofold: track the Akulas and understand how long they'd been there before detection. If they'd crept in silently, as many suspected, it exposed gaps in the U.S. acoustic net, especially along traditional submarine transit lanes. Back in Moscow, officials downplayed the patrol as routine. The timing, however, pointed to something less casual. The U.S. had just restarted missile defense deployments in Eastern Europe, while tensions flared in Georgia and Ukraine. The Akula's appearance felt like an underwater counter-message. Although they eventually departed as silently as they had arrived, the mark their visit left is still felt today. Naval budgets were revisited, sonar calibration protocols revised, and behind closed doors, commanders admitted the obvious. Cold War weapons were simply waiting for the right moment to reintroduce themselves. The Akula-class has continually adapted, rearmed, and resurfaced. These submarines are still out there hunting. Few stories illustrate their legacy better than one that began in India. In 2012, after long negotiations and refits, the Indian Navy commissioned INS Chakra, formerly K-152 Nirpa, under a 10-year lease from Moscow. Chakra was a true Akula II, quieter, more automated, and fitted with modern fire control systems. She served as both weapon and classroom, helping India build a future force of nuclear submarines and test the mechanics of strategic deterrence. Nirpa's path, however, was marred by tragedy. During sea trials in 2008 in the Sea of Japan, a fire suppression system triggered by error flooded compartments with halon gas, and 20 Russian crew members suffocated before alarms finished sounding. It was one of the deadliest post-Soviet submarine disasters. The vessel was repaired and delivered. Armed with cruise missiles and heavyweight torpedoes, Chakra became one of Asia's most advanced underwater predators. Her lease ended in 2021, and India moved to secure a second hull, nicknamed Chakra 3, though delays have kept her in limbo. Meanwhile, in Russia the class has evolved in quieter but significant ways. K-331 Magadan, once an Akula-I, re-emerged around 2020 after a major overhaul and is now reported armed with Kaliber cruise missiles for land attack and anti-ship missions. Others have remained active as well. K-157 Viper, a modernized Akula-II, still slips beneath Arctic ice and surfaces in contested waters, while K-461 Volk has been tracked near the South China Sea and the North Atlantic. The evolution of the Akula-class culminated in K-335 Gepard, the only completed Akula III. Laid down during the final years of the Soviet Union and finally commissioned in 2001, Gepard was longer and heavier than its predecessors, with a redesigned sail, upgraded sonar arrays and dispensers, and even more advanced noise-damping technologies. When she entered service, she was Russia's most advanced attack submarine, at least until the Yasin-class arrived. Though Akula construction slowed dramatically after the USSR's collapse in 1991, the technological legacy endured. Lessons learned in hull damping, propulsion noise reduction, and stealth-informed design carried forward into the Yasin and Bore classes, keeping the undersea competition alive into the present.